Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs. Hi, I'm Gordon Burkell from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com, or of course follow us on Twitter at filmmaker_u. Every week we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by production designer Eve McCarney, whose work includes Liza On Demand, Into the Dark, and American Horror Stories, Dollhouse, just to name a few. Welcome to the show, Eve.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I guess my first question is, you started out as an art director and then sort of transitioned to production design. What have you learned from the art department that you take over to production design that people might not be aware of?
Oh, so it's interesting. My very first credit I actually designed. So I started designing and then started art directing as well, and then also delved into other areas. Like I worked in props, I worked as an on-set dresser, and I kind of bounced around in my early career, which gave me a lot of insight into all the departments, how they work, and how to manage them. So I felt like that experience was really helpful when I started designing on bigger projects, to understand what processes and what it took to be a prop master, to be an on-set dresser, to be a set decorator. I then knew, because I had done those jobs. So I thought that was really helpful. And art directing, when I art directed under Melanie Jones, that was really helpful because I learned a lot about budgeting and the more business side of the management that I didn't really have much experience at the time.
Interesting. Now, I've been looking at the images from American Horror Stories. I have trouble watching the film because it's very disturbing, or the series. What drew you to this series?
I am a big lover of horror. I've been a horror fan since I was a kid. I actually watched Nightmare on Elm Street at my 5th birthday party. It was an accident, but I think it left a very big impression. So I've always had a love of horror. And, when you talk about Ryan Murphy, he's like the top of the game for horror, right? It's elevated, it's conceptual, it's dynamic. Mark Worthington's work on Horror Story is incredible. He's won a bunch of Emmys. So the opportunity to work on that was amazing. It was everything I could have hoped for. And it's really challenging because it's anthology. So every single episode is a brand new deal. There's no permanent sets. There's no rest periods. It's just, and once the train's moving, once you're into that first episode, it just starts to stack. So it's very challenging in that way. And I love a challenge. So for me, it was amazing to be given that opportunity.
Now, can I ask how Friday the 13th, was it, or Nightmare on Elm Street accidentally got shown at your 5th birthday party?
Well, I was with my cousin and my brother, and our parents were in the other room, and the TV was probably on something kid appropriate, and then whoever, it was probably my brother, actually, he was a little older, grabbed the remote and was flipping around, and that's what we stopped on, and we were all just kind of watching this thing. And I vividly remember the body bag being dragged down the high school hallway with the trail of blood. Like, that's the one thing that really stuck with me. And it was obviously very frightening. I was a little kid, but I don't know. Ever since, I've always loved horror. My mom too. And we binge horror movies when I'm home.
I'm going to interrupt this interview for 1 second. We want to thank Pixelview, one of our sponsors. They're a streaming solution for filmmakers. Pixelview lets you stream your work to remote clients for easy collaboration, and it works with both on-set teams and post-production teams. With built-in video chat, you can discuss and make changes in real time and stream directly from your editing software. Or you can use the hardware encoder to stream from DaVinci Resolve or the camera on set. See the promo code and the link in the video description below. Now, you mentioned that American Horror Stories is an anthology. So with such a quick turnaround, how do you keep ahead, I guess, get ahead so that you're not, rushing the clock every time?
It's really hard to be ahead. It really is contingent on when we get the scripts. The first season, I had 3 scripts out of the gate. So I was able, and the first 2 were linked the same story. So it was like part one, part two. So I was able to prep that at once and start soft prepping the third episode, which was really helpful. Once we got past the third episode, that's it. You're out of road. You've got 10 days to prep and then you're shooting it. This season, we didn't have the scripts early. We had one script, and Dollhouse was such a beast. And we had 7 weeks to prep it. And it was basically a big budget period film.
Yeah.
It took all of we barely got it done in time just because the ask was so big. So when we rolled, the second one we actually shot was Necro. I know it aired out of order. When we got to Necro, we were up against it right away. So I work weekends. I work late into the night. I have a really incredible, dedicated team, and it's just all of our hard work that keeps us in play as long as we can. Being ahead is really tough and rare. We ended up bringing a second decorator in about midway through the season because it just was, the one decorator couldn't prep and be shooting at the same time. It was too much work.
Well, it's interesting because like I look at, Dollhouse is very, I guess, Victorian, and then you juxtapose that to like Facelift, which is very sort of cold, I guess sort of sciencey, I guess, or sci-fi almost. Is there a particular style of production, or I guess like a particular art movement or anything that you look to that you particularly like outside of these?
I like a lot. So it was really fun to do. I love period work. And so to be able to do Dollhouse and to lean into Victorian, even though it was 60s, right? Typically you think of 60s bright colors and bold patterns. We did these very traditional wallpapers, tone on tone wallpapers. And I did a menagerie theme in the parlor where, all the dolls hang out. So it's animals. And then there were all the statues of animals around. To play into that theme. That was a lot of fun to be able to do something that was a little more traditional, Edwardian, Victorian. Facelift was great because, to your point, with the doctor's office, we did lean a little sci-fi, a little techie. I love science fiction. So for me, anything that we can kind of play in that world is really great. Lately, the books I've been buying on architecture, I've been buying a lot of brutalism.
Okay. Interesting.
It's really interesting. I have yet to apply that to a project, but I cultivate a library of all sorts of different architectural styles, and that's where I will go for inspiration, just to kind of dig up some ideas and see kind of what I might, want to apply to the different projects. We move so fast on this series that it's hard for me to have that kind of deep dive. But with Dollhouse, I did have the time. So the factory was 1920s, the building updated to be 50s because he hadn't updated it in about 10 years. And then, you had the Dollhouse, which was a Victorian house. And we had 3 locations for that location. We had the Arboretum in Acadia. We had the McNally Mansion in Pasadena was our interior. And then we built the Dollhouse bedroom on stage. And we had a little piece of the exterior facade that we built at the Van Wert Mansion to tie the locations together. And that was also in Pasadena. So we had, with visual effects, had to change the Arboretum to match the McNally. We had to paint the front of McNally to look like the Arboretum. So we had all these pieces to kind of create this one location and then tie it to the house, the mansion.
Now, I do have a question about that, but I do want to start with the high school I went with was a brutalist design, and I didn't realize until I got to university, and they're like, here's brutalism, and they showed my high school. I was like, all right, that explains no windows except for really
probably
high
not
up.
great for a high school.
Yeah, exactly. It was brutal. Now, you talked about like that 3 places were sort of become one for the Dollhouse. And a couple of them were actual locations. So when you're going into a location, like how much are you allowed to change versus how much do you have to leave the same in a situation like this?
So it varies. It's contingent upon the house owner or the location owner, and they all have different rules. We were fortunate. The McNally house had just been purchased and they were in the process of renovating. There were a lot of cracks in the plaster and things that they were looking to repair. So they kind of let us do whatever we want, which was amazing because I did tone on tone wallpaper in the dining room, the foyer, and then we left. There was like a mural above, and like a stencil, and then we left that and then did the wallpaper below in there, and then did wallpaper in the back room. So that was pretty incredible. There was some damage when the wallpaper came down that we had to take care of, so that's always a consideration. And I like to leave a house the way we went into it. I never like there to be any damage, but they got a fresh paint job outside out of it
Yeah.
because they were already going to repaint, so they're like, do whatever you want, just then repaint it. And so
Yeah.
they got some free labor out of that. In On Lefty Brown, we shot in a ghost town
Oh, wow.
called Bannock, and because it was historic, we were not allowed to really do much. They had just restored the interiors. We were lucky, so we had to lean into the colors that were there. The
Mhm.
exterior we were allowed to bring up with linseed oil, so to like darken the wood to make it look more new, because it's 150 years old. It's only supposed to be 20 years old in the story.
Yeah.
So that was really challenging, because there are certain things where you want to get in there and do something creatively and you're not allowed, and we weren't there. It was very specific on how we could attach things to the walls, and we had to work with the conservationist and through that whole process. So it varies location to location, and sometimes you can't do much, and then you have to decide if you do in fact want to use that location, or if you want to find another one or build it. We built
Yeah.
quite a bit on Horror Story this season, actually.
Now, well, but there's also like VFX now. So like, how do you like to work with the VFX team to get your vision completed, I guess, in a weird way?
Yeah, we usually do concept art that will really help guide that process. And we do that early on to get the approvals from the showrunner and the producers and the director. And once we have that, then that'll go to Jason over at Fuse FX, and then he'll contact me and we'll talk as things evolve, and I'll be in the meetings. And that's kind of how we do it. And at a certain point, it's out of my hands once we hit post or I'm moving on to another episode. But he'll always reach out to me if he has any questions. And for Dollhouse, it was pretty straightforward. We knew we wanted to add flowers, and we knew he had to add the keyhole window that I built in my bedroom set, because that had to be there. And we knew the front had to look like McNally. So a lot of it was already laid out. But anything that wasn't, I would provide to him usually in a concept sketch. And it's the same for the Toy Factory exterior, because he had to do a bunch of work on that. So I had nice concept art done of that. And that's usually how I like to work with them, is just give them a concept, research, and then just check in with them throughout the process.
Interesting. Now, is there a particular scene that you're really pleased with the outcome in American Horror Stories?
Particular scene? Yeah, I guess because it feels very, very creepy, very effective, when there's a scene where Kobe is at the dollhouse, the keyhole window, and they pull back on her and they're in the bedroom, and the lighting's just really pretty. And you have, there was a day blew out the window, and then they had to put in the mansion, right? Because it wasn't there. And it just felt really creepy. They pulled back, she's centered on that window. And we did a lot of shots like that in that episode. We did another one with Van Wert in his office, where he's in the center window, and we pull back and you reveal the factory, and then Kobe in the foreground. I thought Lonnie did a really great job with his shots, and shots DP as well. Really happy overall with that whole episode, but those two shots especially stand out in my mind.
What is it about the shots? Is it just that it reveals the whole world, or is it?
I think so. I think it's because it starts small and then you show it, and there's a symmetry. We really leaned heavily on symmetry in this episode. We thought about it. We were very thoughtful about it, and we had the time to think about it because it was the first one, and we had all that time to prep. There's one additional shot that comes to mind now that we're talking. In his office, there was a dollhouse, and there's the scene where after she gets kidnapped, you push in on the dollhouse, and there's our room in the real dollhouse, and that's the opening, right? And you zoom in on it, and she wakes up on the couch, and I thought that was a really cool transition into the story.
Interesting. Now, what would you say, because we have a lot of young people who watch this who are just getting into the industry, so what would you say is something that if you were bringing on young people, that they should know about production design that they might not be aware of?
It takes a lot of perseverance and a lot of studying. For myself, I was, I'm still learning. I'm still learning all the time, and I'm still actively pursuing knowledge, in this field all the time. It's why I have all these books and read all these books. And I still even take classes when I have time. I taught myself SketchUp. I took a production design course in New York at SVA. I took a course at UCLA Extension. So I'm always trying to expand my knowledge, because I didn't come up the traditional way as like a draftsperson or a set designer. So but I wanted to learn those skills. So I made sure I knew those. So I understood the blueprints. And I also taught myself how to build flats, and, did that on some early careers. So I understood the construction side of it. I think it's really important to know how it comes together, and even just outside of the art department, to understand camera lenses, lighting, wardrobe, the different fabrics and materials there. It's all relevant, and it's all necessary to bringing together a cohesive vision for a project. So I would just say study, learn, and try to get as much hands-on experience as possible. I used to be on Craigslist, Mandy, Media Match, all the different sites that were a big thing 15 years ago. And that's how I would find a lot of opportunities. And each opportunity I'd learn more, I'd grow more. And I felt that was really helpful. Schooling is great, but I don't know that you get the same experience if you're not actually on a physical set doing it. And that's kind of how I learned. I just signed up in New York and was on a film set with no clue what I was doing the first time. But I was at a prison in Queens wearing flats, which was a terrible choice. And I just knew, I was like, this is it. It was just so fun and dynamic and interesting and challenging. And each experience I grew and learned more and more. And it's unusual. Most people come up RPA, assistant art director, production designer. And that's a great path as well, because you learn, then you're mentored. But yeah, I would just say try to learn as much as possible, get as much hands-on experience as possible.
Is there a particular genre or era that you want to tackle that you haven't had a chance to tackle?
I haven't really done, I love sci-fi. I've done a few things that lean that way, but I haven't really done like a sci-fi project. So that for me is the thing that I would love to tackle, because it's so creative. It's limitless.
Yeah. You're
creating a world, it's never been done before. So as far as designing, it's kind of the best thing I think you can do. I was on a panel with Ruth Aman, and she's been doing a lot of these really cool sci-fi stuff for Amazon, and I think one was HBO. And I just marvel at, spaceships and space stations, and I love it. It's so cool. So that would be my goal at some point. And I'd like to do more period work as well, like like another Western, or maybe something in the 20s. Cool.
What is it about the 20s that attracts you?
I think it's because it's when Art Deco jumped off, and I just have such a love, and Gatsby was so beautiful, and it's just so lush and rich, and deep dark jewel tones, and a lot of shiny, and I just think it's very glamorous. I think it's always been a period I've been attracted to.
Yeah, it's interesting because Gatsby, like, I think about the book, it wasn't popular until after the writer had died. So he thought it was a failure and all this stuff. And now we still talk about it 100 years later almost.
Totally. Yeah. Poor guy, right?
Yeah. Now, I have one last question for you. What would you say is your guilty pleasure TV show or film to watch?
So over COVID, I had never watched this series before. And so, I had all this time in my hands. So I binged True Blood. Yes. And that was, it's so funny. I was totally sucked in. It took a couple episodes, and then I was in, and it's, it's all over the place. Vampires, it's werewolves. It gets more ridiculous as it goes, but I really enjoyed it. I thought the design was really good. It was really campy. So I really enjoyed that, but it's kind of campy. So I guess.
No, it's a great one. Thank you so much for letting me interview today.
Oh yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
And that's it for this week. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com, or of course on Twitter at filmmaker_u. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching. Today's episode of Filmmaker U is brought to you by our sponsors, OWC. Go to owcdigital.com for all your filmmaking and computer needs. And it's also brought to you by our other sponsors, AJA. Make sure to check out aja.com so that you can see how they can help you in your post-production needs.